Well, today we are standing by our pond in our sand pit, and we're going to be discussing something that probably at first discussion doesn't make a lot of sense, but basically farming minnows. So today we're basically down by the pond and talking about something a little different. So we got thinking, given that food prices and whatnot are getting more expensive, and chickens are one of the harder things to feed because they require, when you don't have sort of pelleted convenient foods or a lot of grains, they require quite a bit of protein and quite a bit of variety. So many chicken feeds, or many commercial chicken feeds, do include fish meals as part of the ingredients. It's not an uncommon thing. But we got thinking, what if we could sort of close the loop and add that part of their diet, or add that part of the protein, by raising it at home? So, as you've seen in some other videos, we do have a pond, and I think the big disclaimer I'm going to say here is this experiment is self-contained. So if you embark on something similar to this, you want to make sure the pond that you're using is not connected overland or underland or in any way that the fish could escape, because as you'll see in a moment, the fish we're using are extremely productive. They have a lot of babies, so you don't really want them escaping. So that being said, what we've chosen as one of our experiments, we have a couple experiments, but is called a Rosy Red Minnow. It's a color variation of a Fathead Minnow that's quite commonly sold as a feeder fish for feeding larger predatory fish, that kind of thing. And the reason why is because they reproduce like mad when the water temperature gets to an ideal temperature for them. So they're super quick to grow, super quick to breed, and they're also omnivores, which means that they will eat sort of insect matter and that sort of thing, but they'll also eat algae, detritus, quite a varied diet, which is great because raising fish that are carnivores is really not productive if you're trying to limit your inputs. So what we've done is we have released Rosy Red Minnows into our sand pit, which is, as I say, nowhere near an overland body of water. And in the month and a half that they've been present, they have done exactly what we were hoping that they would do. And there's a couple of females kind of hanging out over here. Right before we started to film, they were coming in to his nest and definitely checking it out. You can see him, they rub the top of their head sort of over the eggs to keep them basically clean and free of fungus and whatnot. So that's kind of what he's doing right now. And he got the attention of the girls who didn't come over and spawn, but the one nice thing about this species is they're basically a fractional spawner, which means once the water temperature gets to an ideal temperature for them, they just keep spawning. Hence why we have a pond that is full of young Rosy Red Minnows. So here we see the male has actually attracted a female, and they're doing what Rosy Red Minnows do best, producing more Rosy Red Minnows. When you're trying to produce sort of a lot of biomass, basically the trick with feeding any livestock is you end up needing to produce more biomass to feed them than what they produce themselves. So in the case here, if we're going to use these as a food item, they need to be super productive because frankly the chickens are going to eat a large volume of it. It's like the trophic levels, for lack of a better way to put it. But what's nice about this particular situation is these fish, as you can see here, go about their business, and it's extremely low input. Some of our other experiments are a little higher input than this, but this is turning out so far to be an amazing experiment. As you can see, we're seeing the results right here. Now if I just go out a bit, hopefully you can see it, but just beyond I'm not sure if they show up super well, but there are 2 or 3 generations.
And hundreds.
Hundreds of babies. And the speed at which they're growing during the summer months is astronomical, which is exactly what we were hoping for. Now, they're not a fish that we could really use as a food fish for humans. I'm sure there are ways to get creative. So right here, you can see a little better the multiple generations. So there's at least sort of 3, I'm going to say age classes here, or 3 sort of distinct spawns. There's some really little guys, there's some sort of medium-sized ones, and there are quite a few that basically are half grown. And the population doubling time for this species is astronomical. So why did we not just collect sort of wild minnows? Well, there's a few reasons for that, or wild fish. One, there are rules and regulations around how much you can harvest. So there's one piece. And two, it's very similar to what we think of a lot of other endeavors, in that if everybody tried to support their chickens by feeding them wild fish, you can kind of do the math that may not necessarily work out, because you could result in an overexploitation of a resource. Where in a closed system, very simple like this, we can monitor it, and we're the only ones harvesting from it, so we can see what the population is and keep it going. It's not that you couldn't use wild fish, or if you were fishing for sunfish or bass or something like that, take some of the parts that you don't eat and convert that into chicken food. That's completely doable. It's just what we're thinking about, and we will have a video on sort of how we process this in the future, but what we're thinking of, it's not very sustainable. It's very kind of, I'm going to say the term short-minded, in that it would be sustainable for us because we could have free food, but it's not really sustainable in the long term, for lack of a better way to put it. So kind of as a bit of a closing thought on this little experiment with this particular fish, is the one thing to keep in mind here, because they reproduce so fast and so prolifically, you really, in a closed system like this, that doesn't have predators in the whole bit, i.e. it's not a fully functioning ecosystem per se, you do have to cull. So the one thing that's nice here, because we are essentially using this as a food crop for our livestock, we're going to be culling, and we're probably going to be culling quite heavily, i.e. potentially taking up to 75% of the population out of here come sort of late September. So we figure will be sort of the optimal harvest time, but we'll experiment with that. But I think that is a really big key element. You either have to have a predator, which kind of defeats the purpose of using it for chicken food, or you're going to have to be harvesting, and
you have to be the predator.
You have to be the predator, essentially, in this particular little artificial ecosystem. So as you can see by all the little fish dotted across the surface here, if we didn't do that, this experiment could certainly go in a downward direction, i.e. they would probably overpopulate, and disease and all that sort of thing would sort of take over, because something will have to balance it. But anyways, for now, as Stephanie just said a moment ago, she's kind of floored by the results here, and we're only like a month and a half, 2 months into this.
To put it into perspective, we only put 48 Rosy Red Minnows in this pond to begin with, and I can't even estimate how many thousand are swimming around in there now. So that's called some good production.